This is the second day of the Aspen Institute Forum on Communications and Society, looking at open governance and looking specifically at how we can foster citizen interaction, encourage citizen demand, innovation in this space, and particularly today and tomorrow looking at how do we institutionalize these factors in the United States as they are starting to do in the UK already. So this session will begin with reports from working groups who worked yesterday afternoon, looking at the delivery of government services, at the ability of citizens to interact with their governments, and with the provision of data by government so that independent parties can use it for social good. So let's just start with the working group. Let's start with working group A. Susan Hildreth was the facilitator, moderator of that working group, and it looks like she's going to report. Susan Hildreth.
I'm going to do some reporting, and not all my peers are here yet, but I also know Chris was working on getting some slides up here. Because we took the heat of Charlie's PowerPoint suggestion. But I'll just get started while we're doing that. We had, I'm sure all the groups are amazing because we have so many highly talented, smart people. It's just great ideas flowing. And our group started out by trying to work on identifying problems that we thought were really related specifically to our topic of citizen government interaction for performing governmental services. So the key problems we identified, and we did this by clustering our thoughts together. And I'm unlocking this, okay. First was poor design of customer transactions and interactions. I think all of us could agree that, we just see that at all levels of government services. Particularly in the retail transaction, and I say this all the time about my world libraries, if we're not operating like the commercial world that everybody's used to, we just are going to become completely irrelevant, and that happens in all levels of government. Also, we found very poor knowledge about the wide variety of services that are available to all of our customers and residents, citizens, and also the lack of the ability to discover what service is appropriate for what needs. So there's very poor general knowledge and also discoverability to kind of figure out how things work together. We also really identified the lack of ability to provide inclusive services and had a long-standing concern about how we reach vulnerable populations in our communities. It was just an overriding concern. I'm not sure we identified a specific way to address that, but it certainly was something that we wanted to note for the group. We also had some discussion about how do we determine the effectiveness or the efficiency of government services. And in that is, we had some interesting discussion yesterday about the Postal Service. Should government be providing all the services it's providing, or should we consider different ways of service provision, including privatization? And we also identified as an overriding concern, I think, the impact of technology and automation on the public workforce. We certainly acknowledge that our lives and working conditions are very different, but we want to make sure that the public workforce who's providing these governmental services, that we've identified really the skill set that they need to have to be able to serve all of our customers competently. So we identified a couple of possible solutions. We'll talk about those a little bit now. And I think also some of our group members had further discussion, so during the day here we may really want to talk about some even additional solutions. And we did try to come up with solutions that identified and responded to specific problems, but in some ways I think our solutions are really responding to kind of a wide variety of problems. I think we didn't get our PowerPoint up here.
We're about to.
Oh, okay, good. Because I know Clay is going to talk about one of our identified solutions, which is called Elect Me. And when we get it up there, I did put some talking points, Clay, if you want to look at those. If you can't see them, I'm sure you can totally describe what we were thinking about with elect me.
Uh-oh.
It's really it's a great, we hope it would be a simple way to learn about and submit interest for public office, elected or appointed. So let's see if we can
Hold on.
find that up there.
So one thing we traditionally don't think about when we're talking about government services is a service that government provides to the public of putting people on ballots for people to vote for them. The problem that we identified was that one of the murkier requests that you make of government is, I would like to run for office. And whether that is, I would like to run for dog catcher, or I would like to run for Congress. It's usually a process that involves a lot of partisan party mechanics and a lot of special interests. And frankly, as Congress is polling 3% above the Ebola virus for popularity amongst the American people, it seems to me like that system is not churning out the kinds of candidates that maybe people would like to vote for. But this is, in fact, a governmental service. So our idea was to create a simple way for people to register to vote, or not to register to vote, to register to run for elected office, or to register to be appointed to particular boards and commissions and express their interests in those things as well. We think that initially we want to limit this thing to local, but it could broaden to the state and federal levels, I think, in the long term. We sort of started calling it Turbo Elect. We think this is really this would be a good job for Turbo Vote to do, to basically do the same thing for ballot registration as they do for voter registration, in order to field more better candidates. We also think that it's actually a pretty sustainable business. So the way that you make money off of this thing is you give your candidates the GoDaddy experience, for lack of a better word. So while they're registering, you say, like, would you like yard signs? Would you like a campaign contribution page? Would you like to sign up for Nation Builder? And basically use it as a lead generation service for those potential candidates. I think is there anything else that I'm missing from the idea? From elect.me?
That was one of our names we tossed around. I mean, I think that we think definitely if we could broaden and diversify the pool of individuals interested in running for elected office at all levels, and also making more visible the opportunities at some of our appointed boards and commissions where people can have influence, it would begin to help change the system and ultimately result in much better services for the public.
If I could, I know that in looking at the matching people to the commissions issue.
Oh, okay.
But as you think about that, I mean, Clay, you mentioned the viability of the Elect.me as a business with respect to candidates, because there's things you can buy subsequently, the GoDaddy experience, as you said. Is there a similar type thing with the commissions, the appointed positions? Do you see that there's also a business there, or is it something, maybe that's the governmental?
They could buy the positions, right? That's what they do now.
Sorry? They could buy their positions. Okay. Anyway, it's something to think about. Is there, additional business there?
Good,
Great.
thanks.
Should we move on?
And we had one other thought that we want to, or proposal that we want, and this is, I think this is really exciting one. I know Andrea is going to talk to us about it, and it's Yelp or another partner to review our government services. And I don't know if you can see all those topics up there, Andrea, but we had some good discussion about this. I'll let Andrea describe more in more detail, but anyway, I'll let you go ahead and then I'll make some comments.
So we started talking about a Yelp-like tool, and then we landed on, well, why not just Yelp, right? Why invent something new? The idea would be twofold. One is, how do you operationalize an idea like this? You go to Yelp and you encourage them to focus on government services in ways that they aren't totally focused on them now. We know that there are already ways to rate government services, and that can be added by anybody, but try to get some level of buy-in, and then make it really easy to rate. So this was a discussion about how do you get the voices that you don't normally hear in OpenGov in particular. How do you get those voices to begin about what their experiences have been trying to get served by the government that we all pay into, that we all support with our taxes, right? So figure out a way to have tablets or something available at those service points and encourage people. It could be through incentives, it could just be through some sort of campaign to begin to rate their experience at various service providers. We did realize that this may not be such a silver bullet in a situation where there is only one provider of service X in your town, and that is the one place that the government runs for DMV services or for a health clinic, et cetera. But there are definitely benefits to grouping those service providers with other kinds of service providers on Yelp. So on a place where you can begin to compare the extent to which the services being provided by government with services being provided by other private organizations that are loosely similar to one another, we thought there would be some benefit there. The operating part of it is not really the exciting part of it. The interesting part would be to create some sort of campaign around this, right? To make it a competition. So my mayor could challenge your mayor to have the best rated government services in my city versus your city, and begin to create some sort of buzz around the fact that people can be proud of the extent to which their institutions are providing high quality services to citizens in their communities. And then it would need to be followed quickly by, how do you improve? So that's where you begin to get people who are leading those agencies. So I head up an office, a public health office in my town. I'm starting to get kind of beat up because the service rating is pretty low. I only know how to provide service in this one way because this is the way I've been providing services for 25 years. This is a great opportunity for citizen involvement in helping me shape and redesign my service delivery. And it might be the thing that opens the door to that kind of interaction.
A few more words as well. So I was in the group as well, and Tara and Katria, Tiago, and I had a bit of a conversation at dinner, sort of extending one of the other ideas that we talked about in our group, which has some overlap with this Yelp-like system. So originally, Brian Civic sort of brought up the idea of just, just part of this discoverability issue in terms of mapping sort of available services and giving people a better sense of what basic services government does provide to them, even if it's not something that's a direct sort of transactional service. And as we were discussing this idea more, it sort of seemed like the real value in that space was identifying kind of the unfulfilled services, mapping like what services are not being met and highlighting that. So this would not so much be a citizen-facing tool, but sort of a way of identifying opportunities for entrepreneurs or NGOs or even other parts of government from perhaps existing channels and data sources where something like a 311 system where people are calling and asking about some service and maybe it doesn't exist or maybe the government is not able to provide it. So highlighting those instances where there's a demand for a service, or this could even be within a homeless shelter or something like that, where there's maybe they're at maximum capacity, and so they're trying to provide a service, but they're turning people down, right? So what are all the different ways, opportunities that we can collect information about unmet needs, services that are being unfulfilled, and present that as an opportunity? And it could actually even be like a lead generation service for some of these civic startups and NGOs that either want to sort of get new customers, I guess you could call them, or maybe demonstrate sort of funding opportunities that they're trying to provide a service and they can't meet the demand. So how can we better identify those kinds of unmet needs?
Okay, I see some people want to, what we can do is have commenting on the working groups for a few minutes, but as a group, let's first see if the group is done sort of setting out their, leave it up, but see if there's anybody else from the group who wants to expand on that. And just that last point, Philip, on when you're saying this can identify unmet needs, how could you just explain in another sentence or paragraph how that would happen? You would, as part of the Yelp kind of ratings, people would go and mine that and see that there is these complaints, or how,
Right,
how
so-
exactly would it work?
Well, so I think in the context of the rating system like Yelp, it's more of instead of identifying an unmet need, it's maybe or a service that's not being provided. It'd be identifying maybe is provided but is not actually, meeting the real needs or achieving. So poor ratings would show that there's a service that's available, it's just not actually adequate. I think we're talking more about ways that we can identify, services that are not listed in Yelp because they don't exist, right? So, but where is that? Where can we capture that demand? So there are a couple places where I think that's already happening, whether it's any information being collected at a someplace like a homeless shelter in terms of where the demand is, or as I was saying before, with something like 311. I mean, actually, I think some of this process already is within the existing sort of functions of something of a 311-like service, where if they're getting enough questions or requests for something and they don't have an agreed upon answer, they'll have a certain threshold where if we get 50 requests for this thing in a month and we don't have agreed upon answer, we are required to create a new answer or identify that the service is being demanded. So it's more sort of trying to create a more systematic way of identifying those that demand and kind of aggregating it in a way that sort of presents opportunities for
Okay.
entrepreneurs and
Okay,
things like that.
so what, in the comments, what we want to help this group with either suggestions or comments for, the work that they're going to do this afternoon to expand on or drill down in their areas, or, maybe you have a suggestion saying that it's already being done or something. So, Andrew?
Yes, I wanted to contribute some experience from the UK with this Yelp-like idea, where a number of social media collaborative sites set up to do this. One of the first was a site called Patient Opinion, which was an independently run site for people to rate their local hospital and their local doctor. Interestingly, that got a lot of response, and although it recorded some terrible events, actually 48% of the comments were positive. And importantly, it got the sort of feedback of it. It wasn't terrible. It was sort of okay, but it would be better if, and those sorts of things. And that approach has now been, if you like, embraced by the National Health Service. I know that's controversial to use in this country, where they bring together patient ratings of hospitals and doctors and inspectorate data of cleanliness, clinical outcomes, and the like, to allow patients and their relatives to make choices about hospitals and about doctors. And that's been very strongly backed by the health ministers of both parties, because they'd come to the conclusion that although they were being held accountable for the health service, they didn't actually control it because it was such a large organization and they couldn't control every patient event just by setting top-down targets. So they've seen this model of setting some top-down national standards and getting patient and relative feedback at local level to get a pressure to improve services and tailor them locally. Okay. A group is set up called mypolice.org to do the same for the police. The police definitely didn't like this, and the police inspectorate set up a site called mypolice.org.uk, and I think another one of a similar name that was just going to hold official police information. But they were persuaded to back down on that, and I've got the clips for that I can share. The thing about the police was, it wasn't feedback from the criminals. It would have been better if the handcuffs had been warmed. But it actually started to tackle something that was very important in policy terms, which was the police actually giving more support to the victims and putting the victims in touch with the victim support and giving feedback to the victims on what had actually happened.
Well, that's
So I
very
share that
interesting.
experience, and I can share the links with the team later.
That's very interesting. The U.S. Justice Department has a unit that has money. It's funded by penalties that are, imposed on criminals, and it's used to help victims. And maybe they could do something towards building, a response type site like this. Let's get Greg Ellen.
Yes. I've started to see popping up in many stores Belly. Have people seen that? The iPad rewards program, kind of for like the long tail. Let's see, bellycard.com. So it's a loyalty program kind of for small shops. And it works across different stores, et cetera, et cetera. And if you go to the website, you can see what it looks like, but it's basically, they appear to provide an iPad, provide a mobile app, and you can just log into any store that you go. And so I think that the economics were suddenly upon us of, wait a second, I can put in an iPad, it can connect up to Wi-Fi, I can give people a mobile app and a Q code, and be off to the races with a kind of government loyalty program or government services loyalty program for people that are using different services, or et cetera, et cetera. So if we're talking about Yelp, maybe there's the next step, and just
So if I go to the DMV 10 times, I get to skip the line on my 11th try.
Well, that
yeah, I think if you're going to the DMV 10 times, you deserve whatever you want, Clay.
But you could the group could think about what is of a loyalty program in the government sphere.
Yeah, and I think that it might be possible to actually execute something that's quasi-government, quasi-public,
Yeah.
for people to use, rate, consume, participate.
Okay, great. Evan Smith from Texas Tribune.
I love the Yelp idea, particularly the idea of rating elected officials. I'll tell you that we're actually building such a thing for Texas right now. We're in the process of that. And one challenge that we're having is how to mitigate the trolls. I personally have a problem as a user of Yelp not knowing whether the people who are rating businesses or restaurants or what have you on Yelp are people who are genuinely independent of those businesses, or are supporters, or are competitors. And so I tend to discount a lot of the stuff I see on Yelp simply because I don't have the knowledge of who is actually the Yelper in this case. I worry, and we worry as we're building this for Texas elected officials, that the same problem will occur, that you'll have essentially opposition research channeled into Yelp ratings. I wonder if you've all talked about that and how that can be.
Good. Yeah, gaming, you can even do it automatically, get the Turks, and get people to submit a lot of what amounts to rating spam. That's a very good point. Okay, I think Clay
Just wanted
Johnson.
to respond to that really quickly. We did talk about that. I mean, one of our big concerns was not only trolling, but that people's usual experience with our fear would be that that comments would just normally be negative because people's experience of government. I mean, I guess the UK case sort of demonstrates otherwise. I would say that there may be a cultural difference there. Perception of government here and perception of government there. But one idea that we sort of floated around was if we were to build this ourselves, which isn't the plan. Basically the plan for this is let's actually just create a database of all government retail locations and give that to Yelp and tell Yelp to put that into Yelp. So we go to where the Yelpers are, and Yelp has a pretty good reputation system. But if we weren't going to do that, then one way that we thought about that was to make it sort of a praise-only system. So you could, the only thing a user could do is +1 a good experience at a service organization and say like, oh, I had a very good experience here, and then to issue sort of a report card at the end of every quarter about like which agencies, which retail organizations, which cities were getting the most +1s from their citizens and that kind of thing, which is sort of
Mark
spin-off.
Meckler.
So I just had a question about, one of the things we're supposed to do is say what would the government's reaction be. I have a question about whether government cares. And my personal experience with the DMV, Clay, is you go into the DMV, you can have a horrible experience. You call over the supervisor and tell them you had a horrible experience, and you're lucky if they don't tell you to go pound sand. I mean, their attitude is just whatever. And so even if you had a Yelp rating tool for government services, the question is, does government care and pay attention to this stuff? I would argue they don't, and I would argue that there is no incentive system built in structure that really
Mayors
gives
care.
them a reason to care.
Mayors care.
Mayors care.
Let
Yeah,
me,
we, just to respond, if that's possible, I mean, we really look at this and would want to find some kind of a national partner like League of Cities or Mayor's Conference or something like that, because we're really depending on the competition among cities, mayors, other elected officials to want to have their city get a high rating.
Right.
And we also would want the cities hopefully to pledge that they would respond to some of the feedback. But we're assuming that that competition drive responsiveness to this.
okay, I think 3 or 4 people from government has wanted to respond. So I don't want to have a debate over the entire responsiveness of government, because I think, but if you want to make a couple quick points on that, that would be great. Kathy's next.
So I think one of the things that I think will mitigate that potential is the transparency. And so shining light on a comparative basis will create an incentive to drive improvement. So I think it's a fabulous idea, and I think if there are ways to get beyond just services provided locally and extrapolate that up, I think it really does have the potential to create broad demand for high quality. One of the challenges is that you may want to talk a little bit more about how do you define quality? Because one of the issues and it's not dissimilar from Yelp, a discerning reader will be able to distinguish a sort of outlier. But I think it would be helpful to, along with that, define how we're defining, how quality is being defined in terms of efficiency, cycle time, some of the key areas, so that the response in service delivery improvements can be tied to meaningful measures rather than just loud voices.
Okay, Alec Ross.
So, on the question of whether government will care, I think that as long as the use of the tool achieves a certain measure of scale, they absolutely would care. So if you call the supervisor at the DMV, he is going to tell you to pound sand. But the thing about this is because it's so wide open to the public, and every city council member, everyone in the supply chain for delivering the services is going to, both see it and be held to account for it. I actually think that this, one of the greatest results of this kind of tool would be it would actually, I believe it would actually force them to care, because there would be so many accountability measures. The once a year report that only like 30 people read that, evaluates municipal institutions against their peers throws people's feathers in the air for, 3 weeks, and nobody reads it. But the people who do manage these agencies read it, and they do care. If there were something that were completely open to the public that provided the sort of real-time response, I think the biggest cultural change they could potentially produce is forcing people who didn't care previously to care. Now, maybe that may be a very optimistic view of things, but just getting inside the heads and the psychologies of the people in the supply chains here, I actually think that that would probably be the biggest impact
Well,
of it.
to reinforce that, I know on like a VRBO site, which is a personal rental site, if somebody makes a negative comment about the rental, then the owner gets on and says, well, we solved that problem. So if, I would imagine if there was criticism of somebody in government, then they would want to come on and say, well, that really wasn't the case, or we're addressing that. Let's have the additional comments be just additive and short, because we've got to get to the other 2 programs. So Waldo, you have been patient in having your card up. Good.
Lisa G. of Richmond, Virginia says of the Charlottesville DMV on Yelp, DMV is never a pleasant experience. My visit here wasn't awful. The location is good. She gives it 3 stars. In Manassas, Neil E. gives it 5 stars, the DMV in Manassas, Virginia. He arrived at 10:38 a.m., checked into the desk, talked with a lady, got his number stub, filled out the paperwork. They called his number before he even finished out filling out the paperwork. 5 stars, took a picture of it, recommends it. Cody M. only gives it 2 stars. He was very unhappy upon leaving it. The clerk couldn't tell him how much it would cost for the service that he wanted. His wife went back, got different price, additional paperwork. He concludes with, if you really like standing in really long lines after driving over 30 minutes one way, go here. I found reviews, dozens and dozens of reviews of police departments in the Denver area. Some of the places get 5 stars. They really like them. Some not so good, about 2 stars. Apparently one town police department tends to barge into neighborhoods with lights on, never really report what happened, and leave again. And it
So are
pisses
you
people
saying that
off.
it's already happening and that this is unnecessary?
This is a thing. Now, whether people are aware of it and using Yelp for that is very different. Whether Yelp has adequate services listed is different. They seem to focus on physical locations. So like in the city of Charlottesville, all the departments are in City Hall. I don't think it can discriminate between those. But this is a thing that's happening on Yelp. I think they have the infrastructure for this.
Okay. Andrew, you want to respond to
About do government employees care? One, we've already agreed that if you have a chief executive who cares about something, it's a lot easier for you to care about it. So raising this up to some sort of national campaign, I think, would make that possible. The second thing is, we've all talked about those extraordinary government employees who are smart, motivated, or trying to do the right thing. A tool. Not only would it give them an excuse to spend more of their time and energy focused on their customers' needs, which is what they desperately want to be doing, but it would give them the kind of cover from their chief executive to do so and marching orders to do so.
Okay, so what we're going to do, it has a burning point to add to this working group, then let's do it. But otherwise, we need to move on. So Ellen Miller.
Yeah, I have just one quick point, an international example in terms of government responding in a positive way to this. And that's in India. There's a site by a group called Janagraha. It's called I Paid a Bribe, happening in 10, 12 different countries around the world. And officials from the agencies where bribes have been reported actually will call Janagraha and say, we got to stop this, what more can you tell us? And so I think there is it's the sort of socialization and the embarrassment in the public sector. I'm also not surprised, I was going to ask the group, it seems to me like it's not such a novel idea, and it would be great to figure out where this is happening and then get into the marketing of it. And in the marketing of it, perhaps we can use each of our individual communities that we're already engaged with to say, did you know you can go and rate, your interactions with local government? And I think it gives us, we're always looking for something to do for people.
And you'll see the 4th bullet point says Knight Foundation support for campaign. So they've already got it. They're already spending the Knight Foundation's money. Greg, last point. Oh, I'm sorry, Panthea also. Greg?
Government cares, and the people that work in government have high IQs, and they are well aware of the problems. And I think that, but often they can't do anything about them. And if you work in the DMV for 3 years, the chance that you're actually going to tell a supervisor or someone an observation about a problem you're having in the DMV that they haven't heard about before is close to 0. So assume that the people are smart and assume is somewhere else and that they would like your help to solve it and that they already know what it is.
Okay. And Panthea Lee.
Yeah, just another example. Ellen mentioned an international one. We have a project in Nigeria where citizens are able to provide feedback on the delivery of a healthcare service and an agriculture subsidy service. And a really interesting design feature that the government officials actually requested from us was they first of all wanted to respond because they wanted to clear their name. There was confusion from citizens as to what government should or should not provide. And then once they did that, they wanted their response to be pinged up essentially to the national level. These were state officials that then wanted it pinged up to their superiors to have that integrated into their performance review, essentially. And I thought that was really interesting because they were then choosing something, they were building in incentives for themselves. So just wanted to throw that out.
Okay. Going to move to Working Group B. And is it Dan who's going to report on that? Dan is? Oh, you're C. Okay. Working Group B. Michelle Lee.
So the title of our session did its best to avoid the phrase citizen engagement, but I think very quickly we realized that's what we were discussing. And in reimagining a citizen government interaction, we asked, what is the ideal citizen government interaction? The truth is the sustained, engaged citizen doesn't exist. There's no individual, not even anyone in this room, who's going to every community meeting in their neighborhood, participating in all of the open forums online, tweeting at their elected officials, going to vote at every election. That doesn't exist. But most people are smart or are passionate about something, or a handful of things. And so as we're looking at the plethora of citizen engagement tools that are being built, a lot of the different channels that are out there for connecting citizen and government, we're realizing that a bigger dose of targeting would be really helpful. So one example that Frank Hebert shared is that in a community in Brooklyn, I think it's Crown Heights, is that right? There are enough gun shootings to call attention to, and the local response to that is not to stage an online protest or use any technology to mediate, but actually to gather friends, family, teachers, local community members to just light candles and stand at the sites where that's occurred. And that activity, which seems so benign, has grown to enough volume to attract the attention of local officials. So now local officials will go and stand at these events and bring more attention to these shootings. I think something interesting that Frank pointed out is that it doesn't happen in the next neighborhood over. So there's something emergent, something really brilliant in this little bit of organizing that I think where there's room for that to be translated to other communities, other levels of government, other levels of citizen government interaction. So where we landed in terms of the questions that we began to think about was, how might we just at a base level make information available, especially in each instance, to those most affected by it. So if we're talking about shootings, it might be gun manufacturers. It might be scientists who understand biometrics that might be built into these machines. It might be family members or teachers in schools where this has been especially prevalent or they've been affected. So pulling those people together kind of differentiates a little bit from trying to solicit as big volume as possible from as many people as possible. Once that information is available, how might we make it possible for people to act on that information? And then a third question is, how might we make room for this emergent expertise in organizing? Because that's something untapped that government can't necessarily frame, but we need to provide a way for that to make inroads into the way government works today. And then, so that leads us to the last question, which is how might we grow the government capacity to co-create with citizens? There were a number of interesting proposals in terms of solutions put out there. I think one that we talked about quite a bit is the idea of a national interest registry. So when you get your driver's license, you sign up, you check a box, yes or no, if you want to be an organ donor. That's an important contribution to your community, but equally important, we might argue, is the idea that you say, I'm really interested in public education, or I'm interested in fiscal reform, or I'm interested in the environment. And that would make it easier for government to call upon individuals, or to basically pester them, invite them and invite them to respond to topics where there's a greater chance of them actually participating. So I hope I summarized our conversation yesterday, and I invite anyone else who's in the group to clarify or add a little more detail to what we had discussed.
Anybody from the group? Mark, were you in the group? Yes. Okay, Mark Meckler.
So I thought that was a great summary of how we got where we got. And I think one of the most important things came out, I think Stefaan brought this up first, is that everybody in a community is an expert on something. And what government is not very good at, using that expertise to develop better solutions to the problems facing a community. And we're not necessarily talking about laws and regulations, we're just talking about problems and how to deal with the problems. I mean, government is a way that we get together as people and deal with problems in a community. And so when we're talking about sort of this registry, we're talking about a public expertise network and having people submit the things that they're passionate about, that they consider themselves having some skill set or expertise in. Michelle brought up in her community, they're having a problem with bike paths, where a lot of the local mountain bikers are riding these paths. It's considered an illegal use, and they're trying to figure out how to fix this with the local Parks and Recreation Department. And wouldn't it be great if that city had a list of people who, when they registered to vote or when they signed up for other city services, had checked a box that said, I'm interested in local bicycle issues. And now the city could put out an email to those people and say, look, we've got an issue with some biking trails we're trying to resolve. Would you be willing to give us some input? And they could pop out an email to that group of people who already consider themselves experts. I think one of the fundamental fuels of citizen engagement, I would argue the fundamental fuel, is passion. It's somebody's excited about something. And so if you're able to reach out to a group of people that has that already inherent excitement, and you're giving them another thing that people really need desperately, everybody wants it, is recognition that they are one of the experts, and you write that email and say, we need your input on this biking issue in our community, you're likely to almost immediately gather a group of interested citizens who are passionate about the topic that will give better input as a group. You're essentially crowdsourcing from the experts on the subject. So that was really the concrete project idea that came out of it, is how to build these expert networks in local communities that you can go to on particular subject areas.
And I think the flip side of that is that we must grow the government capacity to invite and co-create with citizens in that way.
Okay. Stefaan, did you want to add to that, or no? Okay. Great. Kaichi O'Neill.
I love the idea. I think there's a really cool opportunity for networking between communities as well, because you have experts who care about issues using different web tools in one community, and then solving problems that another community might be experiencing as well. So using those community experts that are willing to act as experts in another community's issues, I think would be a very cool opportunity.
Great. I think somebody, Tiago Picheda.
Also, just to second a bit what Mark said with a bit of evidence, what we see when we look at citizen participation in research, one of the determinants for people to participate is the sense of political efficacy, which is basically the sense of competency. So if you have a mechanism that will trigger that sense of competency, I think you have a good recipe for being successful.
What do people think about this idea of registering, like when you go into DMV and that kind of thing? Is that do you think that's an issue or a real attraction, or, that element of connecting to government, or you could feel like you're being spammed by government by getting responses? Anybody have a, yes, Tony Shawcross.
In the group, I was suggesting that that I thought that the categories that we would come up with as a government and the groupings that we would put those issues together would maybe not really fit, and would maybe quickly become obsolete, and that we could probably just as easily try and plug into more organic ways of people self-identifying for those issues that they're most interested in. There'd be Facebook groups, and then next month there'd be tags or whatever the tool is that people are using, and finding a way to plug into using existing tools rather than coming up with these set categories that I think would probably not be relevant for a lot of people.
Okay, so that'll be something you all will work out. Clay Johnson. Oh, okay. Alyssa.
Just to the point of self-identifying on issues and topics, one of the things we talked about, and it's to what Michelle just pointed out, the flip side of that is government going to do any meaningful productive output based on spamming you? So I guess it's a two-way, like people need to feel like they're being heard and the government's being responsive, to continue kind of feeling like they want to identify themselves as and get spam.
By the way, an ongoing theme is this need for getting feedback from the government. You know, if you're connecting with the government, you want feedback from the government. We saw that in the first group as well. Kelly Bourne.
To the point of so I was in that group, and to the point of the DMV, one of the things that occurred to me last night was the experience with Motor Voter and trying to get the DMV to actually execute on that, and I think that was a really difficult and ultimately not successful effort. But I do think it has the benefit, Tony, kind of building off of what you suggested about tapping into things people are already doing. I think going through the DMV has the benefit if you reach a really broad set of people, whereas trying to work through social networks, you're already sort of self-selecting into areas where obviously only a segment of the population is involved. But that said, I did think, you know, ideas of building it on top of LinkedIn or Facebook or something like that, where people are already providing information about their expertise and interests, might be an easy, if not terribly inclusive way of doing that.
Again, more work for the group to kind of sort in that area. Ellen Miller?
Yeah, I think the original, I might have had the original idea here, and it really came off of the whole organ donation box that you check, at least in the District of Columbia, when you get your driver's license. And sort of, we all see this through our own filters. I know that if I had a request from the DC government because there was a big bike lanes, and I care about bike lanes in the district, I know I would weigh in. I know I would weigh in, particularly if there was an electronic means, at least my voice is heard, or maybe I'd even go to a city council meeting. So it seemed to me like it's the kind of thing, also it could be piloted pretty easily in a half a dozen places. You do your evaluation a year later, you see what happens. But I also like Kelly's idea of expanding it to the places where people are already gathering.
Okay, great. Phil?
I was just going to mention a few, I think, services that are somewhat similar to this. So at the city level, for kind of more emergency-related things, most large cities at least have started to offer some kind of alert system, and you can specify the kinds of alerts that you're interested in. So these tend to be things like, was there, did a crime that just occurred in your neighborhood or on your block? Or if there's something like, an Amber Alert, or like, a storm coming in. So I've had experience with those kinds of services both in DC and in New York City, and I've really appreciated them. And at least in the case of DC, they also use that as an opportunity to collect some information if you want to volunteer information about skills that you might have in the case of a natural disaster or something like that. I don't think most people are aware that those services exist, but I think there's a lot of opportunity to expand upon that. And then I know Clay's emphasized things like Scout, the Sunlight Foundation, which can be used for tracking activity and legislation for things like that. So I feel like part of the challenge with these tools is just letting people know that they exist.
Okay, Clay Johnson.
So one problem is that I think that there's an inverse correlation between someone's expertise and the amount of time that they're willing to volunteer. If you look at, if you go to council meetings, the people who are volunteering their input oftentimes are not subject matter experts at the thing. I'm trying to be very kind. Subject matter experts at the things that they're talking about. And I wonder if, as part of this program, that as you develop it, I wonder if you could come up with innovative ways for government to pay people for their time. We have in the world of procurement, you have this sort of thought of, well, there's an RFP to bring in, a consultant to work for months, right? And there's an RFP, or there's a micro purchase where we'll pay like $3,000 to buy a computer, but there's not a service that's like, look, we just need to pay $100 for an hour's worth of somebody's time for them to consult with us, I'm pretty sure that most cities, and we've studied a lot of municipal procurement law and a lot of statewide procurement law. I'm pretty sure that for the most part that would fly in terms of regs, and it's really just services that would be the issue, or getting the experts in that.
Okay,
network.
I see a debate coming in, discussion on the procurement. I think we're going to just have
it's
to
not.
move.
It's not about procurement. I mean, it's the. I think the regs are there. Is what
I just wanted to add really quickly, that already exists. We have jury duty, and I never made the connection before you said that just now, is we pay people some nominal amount for their
$4.
time. $4, maybe it needs to be minimum wage. But some amount, I think the intent there was to compensate people who couldn't afford to otherwise take time from their work. And I think what you're saying is, I think could apply both to experts as well as to people who are passionate about a subject, but might not, we talk a lot about not being able to make it to a community meeting because you're going to have to take 3 hours off work and hire a babysitter. I think that has really, really broad appeal.
Okay, Stefaan, then I know we've got 4 people who say something, but we're really going to need to move along. So Stefaan, and then...
Just going back to the basic here before we go into the details, but I think the basic proposition was that most of the problems that we want to solve in order to improve people's lives require collaboration between government and actors, especially citizens. And so if you take that assumption, then we really have a demand and supply kind of challenge here, right? On the one hand, there is a demand, i.e. there is a problem, and you need to have actually expertise, different kinds of expertise, because I think, as Mark already indicated, we're not talking about expertise among experts, we're talking about expertise among citizens, which can be experts, right? And so you have a demand, and the challenge is that the demand is not well clarified, right? So that's part of what we discussed as well, is that actually clarifying the demand and framing the problem might actually instigate a certain kind of participation that you, as Clay indicated, you currently don't have, because quite often the problem is not framed in the manner that actually people feel passionate about, or in the manner that they feel have something to contribute. So there is a demand element, and then there's a supply element. And what Ellen and others have suggested is ways to actually identify the supply. And so there are multiple ways that we need to examine here to identify the supply, including, for instance, the self-reporting, including the organic ways. But you can think in terms of multiple ways where you have points of contact with citizens where you can actually have a self-reporting regime, including libraries, where you can have this when you register for a library card, you can have a voluntary way. And so there are all those points of contact that you can have, and you can have also self-disclosure as well. So the real issue here is an issue of demand and supply, and how do you match that in a manner that actually provides for meaningful citizens' engagement that you currently don't have, because there is no matching of that demand and supply.
Great. So what we're going to do is points that will add to the working group's deliberations. So let's start with Tiago.
No, I think the idea of paying people might be a good one. And I mean, sometimes in citizen engagement initiatives, we do pay people, like in citizen juries and citizen assemblies. But we need to be very aware when we're doing that or not, because I'm sure you're familiar with the notion of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And sometimes by paying people, you might actually undermine their intrinsic motivation to participate. I'm not against it. Be careful where to use it.
We'll just go along. Joel?
Also, in terms of compensation, I was really interested in Facebook adding recognition for organ donation. And it seems like a group like this could think about interesting partnerships with social networks to reflect civic participation, acknowledge that, and give a different kind of compensation than money or these other things we're talking about.
Okay, great. Story? Okay. Panthea?
Just quickly mention, I'm not sure if folks here have heard of Catch-a-Fire, but essentially it matches professionals with like NGOs or social enterprises, and so these would be like accountants, finance people, PR people that essentially work for free, and for a time-bound like 30-hour project, 50-hour project, 200-hour project. I think what's interesting there is they're motivated to do this because they want to give back but not maybe take the salary cut, you know, if they wanted to move into this sector. Or according to CNN, I think they were saying you can avoid the soul-crushing guilt of your day job by giving back. But I think they've been really successful, and I think it might be something that the group might want to look into.
It's Catch on Fire, is that what it's called?
It's Catch a Fire, and it's mostly been with NGOs and such. They've done a lot of good promotion, but as far as I understand, it hasn't been done in the public sector.
Kelly Bourne, last comment.
I just wanted to build off relating to Clay and Michelle's comments about being really thoughtful about compensating for this work. I think there's a really rich body of evidence in behavioral economics about challenges with that, and some great examples just in blood donations and the difference between the U.S., which pays for that, versus the quality and volume that you get in the UK, which, as I understand, doesn't. So it'd be, I think, useful to think more about that.
Okay. To Dan and Working Group C. Here's the list of people in the group, and why don't we move right to your first
Wonderful.
point.
So in Working Group C, we focused on data, citizen government cooperation to improve citizens' lives. And we were mindful of the first three words of this conference, which I loved when I first saw it, you know, beyond the tools. So trying to be at some level of organization and abstraction on top of that, I think, is really useful, because we're all, I think a lot of us here are practitioners, and we're really familiar with the existing tools. So when we sat down to look at the issue, we tried to define the problem. So the problem, what we came up with was that this underlying issue that we have after working in this field for some time is that civic technology is just not widely adopted by citizens. So without a user base that somewhat approximates the scope of our ambitions, which is literally just the phrase citizens, there's no way possible that we can have the effect that we want to improve lives of citizens without the things that we make being more popular, literally just that word popular, being adopted in wider ways. And clearly, you know, the conditions underneath that is that we've been at this a while. There's an abundance of civic data, even though it's, you know, unevenly dispersed, but there's certainly a lot. There are a lot of apps. We just talked about probably 15 over in the last, 45 minutes. But there's a lack of, especially recent success, of wide, deep adoption of these types of tools. I think we all talk about, weather and GPS data as being, fundamental building blocks for lots of things that are of use to people on a daily basis, but, recent successes. So the way we organize this, and certainly I would invite my colleagues to chime in, because I know they had a lot of other things to say. But at the core, solution would be create a cohesive network around this, what I've referred to as the civic innovation sector of the technology industry. So that we're able to cycle faster on citizen-focused solutions, and increase efficiency, decrease redundancies, and just make everything sharper. And I think that phrase, the civic innovation sector of the technology industry, is a nice way to think about it, because I think that those of us who do this work, we've had a framing and a approach that is, well, we're here to do civic good, and we're here to make lives better. But again, coming back to the problem, if there's not wide adoption, and if the tools are not popular, and if people can't live without them, we won't have the effect we want. Certainly the technology industry is pretty good at making things that people like. Further underneath that problem statement, and within this network, we would have some other models for it. So obviously there's pockets of organization. We see this chart behind us that maps out this space. There's been a lot of great work. There are specific components within it that are already a network that would serve as guides for this. This is not day one. So certainly, having models. We have plenty of models for this work. Obviously, so, you know, we struggled with some language around it, but certainly going back to tools and then taking it one level higher into a toolkit. And I know, you know, the work that Greg's doing, the work that Max is doing are certainly fit in within this, but just the need to create, improve, and just to standardize like technologies, whether it's data standards that are ad hoc that become more formal. You know, Phil, obviously, you've done a lot of work on this as well. Technical guidance for people so that, you know, so that these configurations and servers and things along those lines meet specific needs. Talked about concept of CCAN in a box. Obviously, the data standards projects and you know, the open government platform. Here's another one where we sort of struggled with language, but clearly, you know, we need more capital or revenue, or, you know, we talked specifically about grand challenges at the governmental level. We've seen some of those, and having perhaps more of a focus on what we consider to be high-value data sets with high-value opportunities to provide, you know, popular things. And again, going back to the weather and the GPS, that perhaps government, especially at the federal level, could guide that. And frankly, I think that the prizes need to get higher, and it needs to be less tokenism and more actual revenue and capital that can help us do these things we keep saying we want to do, which is cycle faster. I often compare it to having been a part of another subset of an industry. I was a poet for some time. I compare it to the Reader's Digest Lily Wallace prizes, you know, the $500 prize they give you for your nice little poem. And compare that to the entertainment industry, where, you know, there's actual money, where that, you know, there's actual popularity. So I see an unfortunate parallel there that I may need to consider career-wise. But, and then measurement. Clearly, you know, we're lacking ways to measure effectiveness of our technology in terms of improving citizen lives. Actual utility, but is one in usage, but also, you know, did we help achieve their goals? Are they in line for less time? Things along those lines. I think I just rhymed. So,
Poetry.
There we go. And public awareness, which again comes back, we can talk about all these terms in sort of a governmental, NGO, nonprofit-y sort of way, public awareness, and we can talk about them in terms of more commercial technology industry sorts of ways. Public awareness is, you know, can also be construed as advertising and marketing and, you know, campaigns that get attention for your tools. So, so we did sort of have this continual theme that we'll be successful when people find their results and not their apps, right? So it's not, oh, I love this app, this thing that allowed me to do a thing. And I think that that's the way that we think of it, because we talk about apps and we talk about developers and we talk about, I think that, frankly, that there's often a real focus on the developers rather than the users and the user needs. And I think once the app is invisible and people are merely achieving their goals, then we'll be successful. And with that, I would ask any of our Group C comrades to add anything.
Any comrade in our capital? Now, the capital would come from the government, or would come from outside?
I think everywhere. I think that, but when it's successful, it's people for whom the app or the tool is useful.
Okay, but the capital to get it going and everything, I mean, yeah, it probably needs a good business model, but one of the things we've talked about is spurring innovation. And the capital, I guess the reason I'm asking that is I think we're in a period where we can't expect much money from government, but sounds like you're looking to outside capital as well. Panthea, did you want to address this?
Well, so I was in this group as well, and I just wanted to add something. So I think we had a really interesting discussion, and I think one of the things that we talked about was, before things will be popular, they need to be accessible, useful, designed. I think sometimes we talk about, why are the things we develop not scaling? Well, what is the utility of these things, sort of as measured by the users that we're designing for? And I think we talked about, part of the interest of, working more with the private sector and the civic innovation side, I guess, of the private sector is, private sector is quite good at having precision and specificity in terms of who they are designing for, who the user is. So, here we often talk about let's make things for citizens or communities, but you don't go to companies and talk about let's make things for people, and so, I think we talk often about a lot of things in the abstract and think it might be just the dynamics of a group like this. We know so many different issues and we specialize in different things. But I think also, sometimes, the areas that we work in, there is a bit of distance between sort of what we do day to day and the people that we're designing for. And so, how might we be able to sequence sometimes working groups like this so that there is perhaps some kind of space to have that, to get that understanding beforehand, whether in terms of demographics or psychographics. And I think, because when you try to design for everyone, you often end up designing for no one. And so I think that was something that we had discussed as well.
Who's our audience? Brett Goldstein, we need to get him a mic. Evan, could you pass him your mic?
So one of the things, going back to what you were saying, Charlie, is I think there's more than just opportunity in the private sector for money here. So imagine, the bigger picture is we create something, have that use case that people actually care about, right? We talked about GPS, we talked about weather. Now, what is one of the things that government really cares about? It's money, right? Like for those of us who have worked in government, dealing with the annual budget is not as fun as you might hope. Yeah, see, it's when we talk about this idea of a grand challenge, wouldn't it be really interesting if you could create a challenge around optimization of spend? I was talking to someone, I think it was Clay or, it doesn't matter who it was, that in Chicago, we publish all of the payments that we make. We tie into our financial system, and every night it's updated on the data portal. These are items which, wouldn't it be an interesting challenge if you helped us optimize how we spend money? How do you, for the technologists in the room, how do you do an error in payment algorithm? Because it's a known fact that when you're spending $8 billion a year, you have errors in those systems. You can start to see how there can be a challenge, not dissimilar than, say, some of the search algorithm challenges, where, wow, if you save a government 1%, maybe that has some value to them. But this is a specific example of what I think Dan and the group is saying. We need to focus as a network on sort of the things that have broader appeal. But I think beyond engaging your typical lay user, there are ways to really engage government. And a way to do that could be through the financial piece, and maybe there's an opportunity there.
Okay, Story?
I think the capital issue is a real challenge, but the grand challenge model, I think, offers some really good opportunities to create interesting cross-sector collaborations. And I would encourage looking at the launch partnership which is NASA, Nike, and USAID, which are not typically bedfellows that you would put together. And I think if we look at challenge, whether it's healthcare, and you can have, Blue Cross, Blue Shield, companies, I think by creating interesting collaborations that look at the entire system of the challenges, you can start to focus on the opportunities where entrepreneurs, their civic technologists can play, and then where there might be larger system-wide changes needed. But I think by bringing those actors and those challenge sets together, it creates the forum where some of those conversations can happen. And I think it has been successful, but it's just not, it's not the way, again, that government typically works. And I think creating more opportunities for those types of things would be really valuable.
Good. Kathy?
So I think one of the themes that was woven through our discussions was this need for not only cross-sector collaboration, but for a kind of unifying way of breaking down barriers and sharing both resources and tools and templates and guidance across not just sector boundaries, but also across different levels of government. Because part of what we see is that there's a ton of activity going on right now, but a lot of it is isolated. And so pull all that together in a cohesive way that would enable sort of rapid, easy adoption of things and replication without duplication, I think would speed this broader adoption and acceptance by the public of the value of government information and its relevance to their lives.
Okay, very good. I want to welcome Sir Nigel, who's intervening now, and he will be leading off the next session. But Nigel.
Yeah, just a point on the on grand challenges. The spending is something where you really do materially engage with people very directly. In the UK, experience on this, particularly the local authority level, one of our local authorities actually put up detailed spending reduction proposals for serious comments. So this was a very interesting kind of experience. The other thing is 360 of our local councils publish everything they spend above about $750 every month. It's not real time every night, but it's every month. That level of analysis has enabled a lot of business intelligence providers to come in and to do very interesting procurement analysis algorithmics across that. Just the range of charging variation for the same damn thing across 360 councils was pretty striking. It also revealed levels of worries around, I wouldn't say fraud so much. We were told that, of course, publishing all this data would just inspire a whole new class of fraud-based activity because people would see what was being spent, generate lots of invoices, and misapply them. Of course, to some extent, what it did reveal was how poor the authentication processes for allowing a invoice to be paid were in many of these environments. So a letter to your local authority claiming to be a supplier and providing a new change of bank account details was sufficient to get the money into your account. So there are multiple kind of facets to these kinds of challenges, I think, if they're engineered appropriately.
Great. And Andrew Stott, I overlooked. So.
No, I've been wondering whether to come in. I think there were a couple of things I wanted to say. I mean, firstly, I disagree a bit, I'm afraid, with Kathy, that it's not the fault of the public and the citizens that they're not finding the government's data interesting enough. It's that we're not providing the services that are going to help them in their lives. So, the question is, does it matter to them? Does it matter to them every day? Do they feel they're gaining value by interacting? And that's what we were reflecting on in the group in terms of much more sort of customer-led. What is the particular value proposition to the customer to get engaged? And that means having all sorts of skills, which are not just technical skills, in putting that together. And it's important that the network should also reflect that. I think the plus point I took away from the group was that nobody was suggesting there was a fundamental discovery still lacking. We actually knew how to do all the bits of this. What we lacked was the way to work together to spread that knowledge and to deploy it decisively to make those compelling services that citizens would want to use. So as a matter of getting that network to work, when most of the knowledge and components needed for that already existed. Thank you.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. I don't mean to imply that there was that it shouldn't be citizen focused. Of course, it has to be. So I think we're on the same page.
Okay, Harper Reed.
I want to build a little bit on what Andrew was saying. One of the things that came out of our discussion yesterday was how often we focus on talking about technology. We focus on talking about data, but we don't talk about product. We're not focusing on what are we actually building and why. And so coming out of the campaign, we started out that way and we just failed. We just ran right into the ground and restarted, and we started focusing on what are the product we're building and why. And suddenly the platform came as a side effect of that. The data came as a side effect of that. The use of that data came as a side effect of that. But when you start out with the conversation being about technology or being about data, then I think what we're doing is we're really looking for a problem to solve rather than trying to find a solution to a problem.
Good, good. Greg, Elon?
Yeah, just echoing Harper and Andrew. The idea of creating applications or experiences that are so compelling that you feel the value of the supporting infrastructure underneath it. So the experience of Excel, making people understand the value of buying a personal computer, or the experience of connecting with people or getting documents instantly, helping them understand the value of the web, and what kind of applications or services could we enable that help people understand the underlying value of government engaging in sharing data and creating collaborative experiences.
Okay, so from the 3 working groups, you've actually have identified problems. Always good to not have a solution in search of a problem, but identify a problem and then aim for a solution. You've come up with some specific solutions, and looks like you've gotten great work along those lines. What you want to do, of course, is continue refining that, identifying the barriers to making this, what's keeping this from happening. On the other side, what do we need to do? Who needs to do what to make it happen? As you identify the barriers and as you think about these things, we hope that you'll be able to add little stickies to our map on the far left over there in the corner so that we can help map this whole sector. And then also think as we move forward, how do we institutionalize more broadly this whole, the overall aim of fostering innovation in this space and creating citizen demand in this space? So you have, I think you've made great progress and you have a fair amount of work to do still this afternoon. What we're going to do now is break for actually 30 minutes to give a lot of time for one-on-one conversations, catch up if you need to on your emails and whatever, and come back at 10:45 and look into, again, this model of the Open Data Institute and what analog might, it is aimed at looking at this institutional question. What might we do here in the United States? And so I think we have a very good, important dialogue to continue this morning. Thank you.